After 70, your inner world becomes your real home. There comes a time in a man's life when the house he spent decades building begins to feel different. Not worse, not useless, just different. The rooms are still there. The chair still knows the shape of his body. The kitchen still carries the smell of coffee in the morning. Old photographs still sit on the wall, smiling from years that no longer exist except in memory. The yard may still need work. The mailbox still opens. The family still calls sometimes. But after a certain age, a man begins to understand something he did not understand when he was young. A roof can shelter your body without sheltering your soul. A paid-off house can still contain an unsettled heart. A life can look complete from the outside, while the inside is still asking questions no one else can answer for you. That is why, after 70, your inner world becomes your real home. Not because the outer world stops mattering, it does matter. Your family matters, your health matters, your house, your routine, your finances, your body, your friendships, your memories, all of it still matters. But the place where you truly live becomes deeper than a dress, furniture, schedule, or reputation. You begin living inside your thoughts, inside your conscience, inside the memories you have made peace with, and the ones that still knock at night. Inside your faith, or your doubt, or the quiet space between the two. Inside the way you speak to yourself when no one is listening. Inside what you believe God sees when He looks at the life you actually lived, not only the version other people remember. That is the real home now. And if that inner home is crowded with regret, bitterness, fear, and unfinished sorrow, even the nicest house can feel cold. But if the inner home has been softened by truth, mercy, gratitude, forgiveness, and grace, a man can sit in a small room near the end of life and still feel strangely rich. I want to tell you about a man named Thomas. Not because he was famous. He was not. Not because he did anything history would write down. Most men do not get written into history. They get written into bills paid, children raised, lawns cut, roofs repaired, long drives made in bad weather, and silent prayers whispered before sunrise. Thomas was that kind of man. He had worked most of his life with his hands, not fancy work, honest work, the kind that makes a man tired in his bones and quiet by dinner. He had been a husband, a father, a neighbor, a churchgoer sometimes, a sinner more often than he liked to admit, and a man who believed responsibility was one of the languages of love. For decades, his life had a clear shape. Wake up early, go to work, do what needed doing, come home, carry whatever had to be carried. If the car broke down, he handled it. If the roof leaked, he climbed up there. If money was tight, he got quieter, worked more, and told the family everything would be fine before he knew whether that was true. His children knew him as solid. His wife knew him as dependable. His neighbors knew him as the man who would lend a tool and not make a speech about it. But dependability is not the same as peace. And by the time Thomas turned 72, he began to notice that the world outside him had grown smaller, while the world inside him had grown louder. That surprised him. He thought old age would be mostly about the body, the knees, the back, the blood pressure, the doctor asking questions he did not enjoy answering. And yes, all of that came. His body stopped obeying him the way it once had. Steps became negotiations. Sleep became lighter. Names sometimes took longer to arrive. A jar lid could make him feel insulted. But the body was not the deepest surprise. The deepest surprise was memory. Memory began walking through the house like an uninvited guest. It showed up while he was making coffee, while he was folding an old towel, while he was sitting in the garage looking at tools he did not use much anymore. A small thing would open a door, the smell of sawdust, a scratch on the dining table, his wife's old recipe card tucked behind a stack of envelopes. Then suddenly, he would not be 72. He would be 38 again, standing in the kitchen after a fight he never apologized for properly. Or 45, sitting in the truck outside work trying to gather himself before going inside. Or 26, holding his first child and feeling a fear so large he mistook it for purpose. This is one of the secrets of old age. The past does not stay behind you. It moves in. It sits beside you. It waits in familiar rooms. And if you have not made peace with it, your inner world becomes a house full of locked doors. Thomas did not understand that at first. He only knew that he was becoming quieter. His daughter would call and ask how he was, and he would say the same thing every time. Doing fine, keeping busy, can't complain. But after he hung up, the house felt larger than it had before the phone rang. His son would stop by with the grandchildren, and the place would fill with movement. Shoes kicked off near the door, a child asking for cookies, someone turning the television too loud, a little girl climbing into his lap for 3 minutes before running away towards something brighter. Thomas loved them. That was not the problem. Love was there. The problem was that after they left, he would stand in the doorway and feel as if life had passed through him without fully reaching him. He could not explain it without sounding ungrateful. A man surrounded by family is not supposed to admit that his soul feels homeless. So he did not say it. He checked the locks, turned off the lights, sat down in his chair, and felt the inner room growing louder. The first 10 minutes of old age are not always about age. They are about recognition. A man begins to recognize what his younger self avoided. He recognizes how much of his identity was built on motion, how much of his confidence came from being needed, how many feelings he buried under work because work was easier to respect than sorrow. How often he confused being strong with being unreachable. Thomas had spent so long living outward that inward life felt unfamiliar. He knew the road to the hardware store. He knew which pipe in the basement made noise in winter. He knew the exact sound his wife made when she was annoyed but trying not to start an argument. But he did not know how to sit quietly with his own soul. That is a dangerous thing to discover late. Not because it is hopeless, because it is honest. And honest things can hurt before they heal. One morning, Thomas woke before sunrise. His wife, Mary, was still asleep beside him. They had been married 46 years. 46 years is long enough for love to become both sacred and ordinary. Long enough to know the other person's cough from another room. Long enough to have shared bills, illness, disappointments, holidays, funerals, children, silence, forgiveness, and small irritations that survive longer than they deserve. He looked at her sleeping and felt a tenderness that surprised him. Not the young kind, not the kind made of excitement. Something quieter. A tenderness mixed with guilt. He wondered how many years she had lived beside him without being fully met either. That thought humbled him. For months, he had been quietly feeling sorry for himself because no one seemed to know his inner world. Then one morning he realized Mary had an inner world too. And maybe he had passed by the door of it 1,000 times. That is what age can do when it has been touched by grace. It does not only show you your wounds, it shows you the wounds you may have missed in others. Without grace, memory becomes accusation. With grace, memory becomes instruction. It says, look again. Not to hate yourself, not to rewrite your whole life as failure. Look again so you can love better with the time that remains. Thomas got out of bed slowly. The floor felt cold under his feet. In the kitchen, he made coffee and stood near the counter, listening to the machines sputter and breathe. There was a small wooden cross above the doorway, something Mary had hung there years ago. He had walked under it almost every day without thinking. That morning, he looked at it differently, not as decoration, as a question. What good is a cross on the wall if pride still rules the house? That question stayed with him. He was not a man who used religious words easily. He did not like people who made faith into performance. He had known men who spoke beautifully about God in public and cruelly to their families in private. That kind of religion had always made him suspicious. But deep down, beneath all his caution, he still believed there was a God who saw the secret life. Not only the good deeds people praised, not only the failures people remembered. The whole thing, the fear, the motives, the pride, the love that came out badly, the apologies that never happened, the quiet sacrifices no one clapped for, the times he wanted to do better and did not know how. This thought frightened him and comforted him at the same time. To be fully seen by God is terrifying if all you have is pride. But if grace is real, being fully seen is also the beginning of being healed. That morning, Thomas did something he had not done honestly in years. He prayed without performing. No long words, no polished sentences, no bargaining. Just a tired man standing in a kitchen, whispering, "Lord, make my heart a place I can live in." He did not feel thunder. No vision came. The coffee still dripped, the refrigerator still hummed. But something in him had turned toward home. Not the house, the inner one. And that is where the real work began. A man's inner world is not automatically a peaceful place just because he gets older. Old age can make the heart wiser, but it can also make it harder. It depends on what a man does with memory. If he feeds resentment, the inner home becomes a courtroom. Every old insult sits in a file. Every disappointment becomes evidence. Every person who failed him is called back again and again to stand trial in his mind. A man can sit alone for hours and rehearse cases he will never speak out loud. He can win every argument in his head and still lose peace in his soul. Thomas knew that danger. He had done it. An old slight from his son, a cold remark from Mary, a business failure from years ago, the friend who disappeared when Thomas needed help. All of it could return at night and make a courtroom inside him. But slowly, he began to understand that resentment is a terrible landlord. It lets you live in your own heart, but it charges rent every day. The price is joy. The price is gentleness. The price is the ability to see new mercy because old pain has taken over every window. Forgiveness did not come easily to him. He did not trust cheap forgiveness. Neither should anyone. Forgiveness is not pretending nothing happened. It is not calling harm harmless. It is not letting people continue to crush what God has asked you to steward. But Thomas began to see that unforgiveness was not protecting him as much as it was possessing him. He had carried certain offenses for so long that they had become furniture in his inner house. He knew where they sat. He knew how to walk around them. He had even grown used to their shape. But peace cannot move freely in a room crowded with old bitterness. So he began slowly, not with heroic emotion, with small surrender. He stopped retelling one old injury every time it came to mind. When the memory arrived, he would breathe and say, "Lord, I give you what I cannot fix." Some days he meant it. Other days he only wanted to mean it. That counted too. Faith, late in life, is often not a fire. Sometimes it is an old man choosing one more time not to let bitterness have the final word. Thomas also had to face regret. Regret is different from resentment. Resentment points outward. Regret points inward. It sits beside a man and says, "You know what you did. You know what you failed to say. You know where you were proud. You know which moments will not return." That voice can be cruel if it is not met with grace. There were nights when Thomas remembered his daughter at 16, standing near the back door with tears in her eyes. He could not even remember the whole argument anymore. Only her face. That was the worst part. Memory had kept the wound but lost the details of the weapon. He remembered telling his son, "Don't be weak," during a season when the boy had needed someone to say, "Tell me what hurts." He remembered Mary asking if they could talk, and he said "not tonight" so many times that eventually she stopped asking in that tone. Old age does not invent those memories. It reveals which ones are still alive. At first, Thomas defended himself against them. "I was tired. I was under pressure. I did the best I could." Those things were partly true, but partial truth can become a hiding place. Eventually, he learned to say something cleaner. "I was tired, and I still wounded them. I was under pressure, and I still needed to be gentler. I did the best I knew then, and now I know more." That kind of honesty did not destroy him. It humbled him. And humility, though painful at first, made the inner house less crowded. One afternoon, Thomas called his daughter. He had rehearsed the call for 3 days, not because the words were many, because the pride was old. When she answered, he almost talked about the weather. That would have been easier. Weather is one of the great hiding places of families. But he closed his eyes and said, "I've been thinking about when you were younger." She went quiet. He could hear traffic on her end of the phone. Then he said, "I know I could be hard when you needed me to be kind." The sentence stood between them. No music played, no miracle made it easy. His throat tightened. Every instinct wanted to add a defense. "I was working so much. I was scared. I didn't know better." All of it waited behind his teeth, but for once he let the apology remain clean. His daughter did not speak for a while. When she did, her voice was careful. "I know you loved us," she said. Then, after another silence, she added, "But yes, Sometimes you were hard to come close to. That sentence hurt him. It also told the truth. A man who wants peace must learn not to punish truth for arriving late. So Thomas listened, not perfectly. His chest burned. His pride rose up more than once. But something in him had grown tired of being protected from healing. By the end of the call, nothing was fixed in the simple sense. No childhood was rewritten, no old pain vanished. Yet when he hung up, his inner house had one more open window. That is what late honesty can do. It may not rebuild the whole home in one conversation, but it lets air in. And sometimes air is the beginning of life. After that call, Thomas began paying attention to the rooms inside himself. The room of regret, the room of gratitude, the room of fear, the room where old anger still sat with its arms crossed, the small chapel inside him, almost forgotten, where he had once prayed with more trust than suspicion. He realized his inner world had been neglected like a house no one had cleaned properly in years, not because he was evil, because he had been busy. Busy can become a respectable way of avoiding the soul. A man can spend decades fixing what is visible and never tend what is eternal. He can maintain the lawn and neglect his conscience, paint the walls and ignore the bitterness, organize tools while his prayer life gathers dust, pay insurance while never asking whether his heart is insured against despair. That may sound dramatic, but old age has a way of making spiritual neglect practical. When the body slows and the schedule opens, you finally have to live with the person you have become. That is why the inner world matters so much after 70. You cannot outrun yourself the way you once did. Work cannot hide you as effectively. Achievement cannot distract you for as long. Other people's opinions begin to lose some of their old power. The mirror tells one truth, the soul tells another. And the soul asks, "Are you at home here? Are you at home in your memories? Can you sit with your own choices without drowning in defense or shame? Have you made room for God to speak where pride used to keep the door shut? Are there people you need to forgive, not because they deserve control over your future, but because you are tired of letting them live rent-free in your heart? Is there someone who deserves an apology before time makes the conversation impossible?" These are not small questions. They are the architecture of the inner home. Thomas began with a simple practice. Every morning before the news, before the phone, before the world told him what to be angry about, he sat with his coffee and asked one question: what kind of man am I becoming today? At 72, that question felt strange. Becoming sounded like a young person's word. Old men are supposed to already be formed, finished, set in their ways. But Thomas started to believe that as long as a man can repent, he can still become. As long as he can forgive, the story is not finished. As long as he can bless someone without needing to control them, his heart is not completely hardened. As long as he can pray honestly, there is still a window open toward heaven. That thought became a kind of morning light for him. Not every day felt holy. Some mornings he was irritated before the coffee finished. Some days his knees hurt and his mood followed them. Sometimes Mary said one small thing and old defensiveness rose in him like a dog hearing a noise. But now he noticed it. That was new. The younger Thomas had reacted and called it personality. The older Thomas began to see reactions as invitations. Why did that bother me so much? What am I protecting? Is this wisdom speaking? or only old fear wearing a familiar coat? Those questions became part of his inner housekeeping. A man has to sweep the heart, too. Otherwise, old dust becomes atmosphere. One day, Mary found him sitting in the garage with an old fishing rod across his lap. He had not fished in years. His father had given him that rod, the same father he had judged, resisted, resembled, and missed. Mary stood near the door and asked what he was doing. "Thinking," he said. In the past, that would have ended the conversation. This time, she stayed. After a while, Thomas said, "I think I have been angry at my father for things I copied from him." Mary did not rush to answer. That was grace, too. Sometimes grace is not a speech. It is someone staying quiet enough for truth to keep walking. Thomas looked at the rod and said, "He never taught me how to talk." Then, almost laughing at himself, he added, "And somehow I blamed him while teaching our children the same silence." Mary sat down on an old folding chair. The garage smelled like cardboard, oil, dust, and forgotten summers. For the first time in a long time, they spoke about his father without turning the conversation into a complaint. They spoke about inheritance, not money, patterns. Silence passed from one generation to another, fear disguised as discipline, tenderness buried so deep that people mistook its absence for strength. That conversation did not make Thomas's past easy. It made it more honest. And honesty gave him a strange compassion, not only for his father, but for himself. Self-compassion is dangerous if it becomes excuse, but holy if it becomes understanding. Thomas was learning the difference. He was not trying to excuse the harm. He was trying to understand the chain so it would not keep binding everyone after him. That is one of the most sacred tasks of old age, to stop passing down what wounded you. To let grace interrupt the family pattern before it becomes another child's burden. Some people think the last years are only for resting. Rest matters. A tired body deserves gentleness. But the last years can also be years of spiritual repair. A man may not build another house. He may not start another career. He may not travel everywhere he once imagined. But he can repair the way his presence feels to the people closest to him. He can become less sharp, more honest, less concerned with winning, more willing to bless. He can stop making every conversation a place to prove he still matters. Instead, he can become the kind of person others feel safe telling the truth around. That is not small. That may be one of the greatest works of his life. Thomas learned this slowly with his grandchildren. Children have a way of revealing whether an old person's inner home is warm or cold. They do not understand all the reasons. They only feel the atmosphere. When a child spills juice, does the room become unsafe? When a child asks the same question 3 times, does irritation rule the face in front of them? When a little boy wants to show an old man something small, does the old man still have room for wonder? Thomas was not always patient, but he began trying. One afternoon, his grandson brought him a drawing. It was not a good drawing in any artistic sense. A crooked house, a blue sun, a stick figure that might have been Thomas, though the head was too large and the arms came out of the neck. The younger Thomas might have smiled quickly, said, "That's nice," and returned to whatever practical thing occupied him. But the older Thomas looked at it longer. He asked why the sun was blue. The boy said, "Because yellow was boring." Thomas laughed, really laughed, from a place that surprised him. Then he put the drawing on the refrigerator. Not perfectly straight. That bothered him for a second. Then he let it stay crooked. A small thing. But sometimes the soul changes in small things before it changes in large ones. He was learning that love does not always ask for efficiency. Sometimes love asks an old man to look at a blue sun and receive the child who brought it. That day, after everyone left, Thomas did not feel the same emptiness. The house was quiet, yes, but something had entered the quiet. Not noise. Presence. The drawing on the refrigerator became a small sign that his inner home was changing. He had been present enough to receive a moment instead of dismissing it. Old age can either narrow a man until only complaint remains, or deepen him until small mercies become visible. The difference is not circumstances alone. It is attention. It is humility. It is whether the inner world has room for gratitude. Gratitude is not pretending life was easy. Thomas did not pretend. He had buried friends, lost strength, made mistakes, watched time take things without asking. But gratitude taught him to stop measuring his life only by what had been taken. There were still mornings, still coffee, still Mary's hand resting near his on the table, still grandchildren who believed blue was better than yellow, still a God who had not abandoned him to the worst parts of himself. Still time to bless, still time to soften, still time to become truthful. Gratitude made the inner home livable, not because it erased sorrow, because it opened windows. One evening, Thomas and Mary sat on the porch. The sun was going down behind the neighbors' trees. A dog barked somewhere. A car passed too fast. Nothing important was happening, which is where many important things hide. Mary asked him what he was thinking about. For once, he did not say nothing. He looked at the street and said, "I think I spent a lot of years trying to make sure we were safe, but I did not always make sure we were close." Mary did not answer right away. He thought maybe he had said too much. Then she said, "I know." 2 words. Not cruel, not gentle exactly. True. He nodded. The old Thomas might have defended himself. This time he let truth stay in the air. A few minutes later, Mary reached over and put her hand on his. That was all. No dramatic speech, no perfect reconciliation. Just a hand. After 46 years, a hand can say many things. It can say, "Yes, we lost something." It can say, "I am still here." It can say, "Perhaps the last part of the road can be walked differently." That night, Thomas slept better than usual, not because all was healed, because something had become honest without becoming hopeless. That is a rare gift, and a man after 70 should not despise rare gifts. The inner world becomes home, because that is where a man stores the meaning of everything. The outer house contains objects. The inner house contains interpretation. 2 men can sit in the same kind of chair at the same age with similar losses behind them, and one becomes bitter while the other becomes wise. The difference is not that one suffered and the other did not. Both suffered. The difference is what the suffering was allowed to become inside them. Pain that meets pride often becomes resentment. Pain that meets grace can become compassion. Disappointment can harden the heart into a locked room. It can also teach a man to stop judging other people's weakness so quickly. Regret can become a prison. It can also become repentance, and repentance can become a doorway. This is why spiritual life matters more, not less, as a person ages. Not as decoration, not as a Sunday habit only, not as a set of phrases used to avoid human pain. Real faith gives a man somewhere to bring what he can no longer outrun. The old fear, the old shame, the memories that wake him at 2 in the morning, the question of whether his life mattered, the sorrow that some chances are gone, the hope that mercy may still be larger than his failure. Psychology can help him name the rooms. Faith can help him believe the house is not beyond repair. A therapist might call it integration. A pastor might call it grace. A humbled old man might simply call it coming home. Thomas began to see his life less as a courtroom and more as a long road. Some parts were beautiful. Some were foolish. Certain turns still hurt to remember. There were people he loved badly because he did not know how to love well. There were seasons when he did the right thing with the wrong spirit. Other times he failed, then dressed the failure in excuses until even he believed them. But the road was not only failure. He had stayed. He had worked. He had prayed in his own rough way. He had loved, even when the love came through imperfect hands. The task was not to call darkness light, nor to call light darkness. The task was to bring the whole road before God and ask for mercy to understand it truthfully. That is what an inner home needs: truth without cruelty, mercy without denial, memory without worshiping the past, hope without pretending the future is endless. After 70, a man has to be careful with nostalgia. Nostalgia can comfort. It can also deceive. It can make the past look warmer than it was, and the present look poorer than it is. Thomas loved old music, old photos, old stories. But he began to notice that some memories were not doors to gratitude. They were hiding places. He could retreat into them when the present asked too much honesty. He could talk about how things used to be instead of admitting what still needed healing now. So he learned to ask another question. Is this memory making me more loving or only more resentful? That question helped him. A good memory should not make a man despise the living people in front of him. A good memory should teach him tenderness. It should remind him that every person is temporary, every season passes, and every ordinary day is more sacred than it appears while you are living it. One Sunday, his family came over again. The house was loud like before. The same kind of noise, the same kitchen movement, the same children leaving crumbs in places crumbs should not be. But Thomas was different. Not completely. No one becomes entirely new in a week. Yet something inside him was less defended. At dinner, his son talked about being exhausted. The old Thomas would have said, "That's life," or "You just have to push through." Instead, he looked at his son for a moment longer than usual and said, "I remember that kind of tired." Then he stopped. No lecture, no advice disguised as concern. His son looked up. Something passed between them, small but real. Later, his daughter mentioned one of the grandchildren struggling at school. Thomas almost gave an opinion. It rose in him naturally, like an old machine starting up. But he waited. His daughter kept talking. Under the details, he heard fear, a mother's fear, the kind that wears busyness so it will not look helpless. He said,
You're carrying a lot." She looked at him in surprise. Her eyes filled, but she blinked it away. That was enough. Not every holy moment announces itself. Some arrive quietly, in one sentence that tells a person they have been seen.
After dinner, Thomas's granddaughter asked him why he kept looking at everyone. He laughed and said, "I'm practicing." "Practicing what?" she asked. He thought for a moment. Then he said, "Noticing." The child accepted that answer and ran away. But Mary heard it from the kitchen and smiled without turning around. Noticing. That became one of Thomas's late-life disciplines. He had spent decades managing life. Now he wanted to notice it. There is a difference. Managing asks, "What must be done?" Noticing asks, "What is actually here?" Managing protects the structure. Noticing protects the soul. A man needs both, but many men spend their best years mastering one and neglecting the other. After 70, noticing may become a form of prayer. You notice the light on your wife's hair, the way your son looks tired behind his jokes, the way your daughter still wants your approval even though she has her own family now, the way your own heart tightens when you feel unnecessary, the way God keeps placing small invitations to humility inside ordinary moments. To notice is to stop sleepwalking through the gift, and many older people are not suffering only because life became smaller. They are suffering because they have not yet learned how to see the smaller life as sacred. Thomas learned this slowly. His days did not become exciting. He still took medicine, still lost his glasses, still complained about prices now and then, still had days when old sadness sat heavy in the room. But his inner home was changing. A man can tell. He becomes less afraid of silence, less eager to blame, more willing to say thank you before the moment passes, more able to let another person be unfinished without trying to control them, more aware that God is not only found in dramatic rescue, but in quiet transformation. The inner home becomes warmer, not because every room is repaired, because the doors are no longer all locked. One night, Thomas could not sleep. Rain tapped against the window. Mary slept beside him. The house made its small night sounds. He thought of death, not in a dramatic way, more like a man looking at a road sign he had been ignoring for miles. At 72, death was not near enough to dominate every hour, but it was near enough to make lies feel expensive. He wondered what would remain when he was gone. The house would remain for a while. His tools would be sorted or sold. The children would divide certain objects and not know what to do with others. Someone would find old receipts in a drawer and throw them away. His chair might seem too empty for a season, then eventually become just a chair again. That thought did not make him bitter. It made him sober. Legacy, he realized, is not mainly objects. It is atmosphere. It is the emotional weather you leave behind in people. Do they breathe easier because you existed? Do they become more honest because you finally became honest? Do they carry less shame because you learned mercy before the end? Do they remember your faith as pressure or as a door toward grace? These questions kept him awake, but not in a hopeless way. They gave shape to the time left. A younger man asks, "What can I build?" An older man begins to ask, "What can I bless?" That shift can change everything. Thomas started blessing more. Not formally, not with dramatic religious language, with attention, with patience, with fewer sharp answers, with prayers spoken quietly after the children left, with a hand on Mary's shoulder as he passed through the kitchen, with the decision to tell his grandson, "I like the way you think," instead of merely correcting the mess he made. Blessing became less about words and more about presence. A blessed person is not controlled. They are strengthened to become what is good. Thomas wished he had known that earlier. He had tried to shape people by pressure. Now he wanted to shape the room by peace. That is the kind of change people may not notice at first. The family might not say, "Father has become spiritually integrated in late life." Families do not talk like that. They might only say, "He seems softer lately," or "Grandpa listens more now," or "Mom and Dad seem quieter, but not in the old, cold way." That is enough. The deepest changes do not always need grand announcements. Sometimes a home heals by becoming slightly safer again and again, until the people inside can finally breathe. If you are listening to this and you are past 70, or close enough to feel the shadow of it, do not believe the lie that your inner life no longer matters. It may matter now more than ever. Your family may remember what you did. God sees what you are becoming. Your body may be slower, but your soul can still become more truthful. Your calendar may be quieter, but your prayer can become deeper. Your outer world may shrink, but your inner world can become a place of mercy instead of a warehouse of old pain. Do not abandon that work. Do not spend your last years decorating resentment. Do not polish old arguments until they shine brighter than gratitude. Do not keep rehearsing disappointments that God is inviting you to release. There is still time to make the inner home warmer. There is still time to apologize without defending. Still time to forgive without pretending. Still time to ask better questions. Still time to sit with Scripture not as a weapon against others, but as a mirror for your own heart. Still time to tell someone, "I love you," and not hide the sentence under a task. Still time to let grace make you gentle. And if you are younger, watching someone older become quiet, do not assume silence means there is nothing inside. An old man may have a whole cathedral of memory inside him. An old woman may carry prayers no one has ever heard. Your parents may know how to talk about doctors, bills, weather, and errands, because those are safer than the deeper rooms. Ask gently. Listen longer. Do not turn every old story into a complaint about repetition. Sometimes the story returns because the meaning has not yet been received. A person near the end of life is not only looking backward. They are trying to understand where they have been before they fully go where all of us are going. That deserves reverence. Not worship, not denial. Reverence. The kind that says, "There is a soul here, and it is still being formed." Thomas did not become perfect. No honest story should end that way. He still had moods, still had regrets, still sometimes answered too quickly, still felt lonely on certain afternoons when the house was too quiet and the past felt too near. But something essential changed. He was no longer only enduring his inner world. He was tending it. There is a difference. Enduring means you live with whatever is inside you because you have no choice. Tending means you begin to care for the inner rooms with honesty and grace. You open windows. You remove what is poisoning the air. You make space for prayer. You let gratitude sit where complaint used to dominate. You stop treating regret as a master and let it become a teacher. You allow God to enter not only the clean rooms, but the rooms you were ashamed to show him, as if he had not seen them all along. That is when the inner world becomes home, not because it is flawless, because it is inhabited by truth, because mercy has a chair there, because shame no longer locks every door, because memory and hope have learned how to sit in the same room, because the man has stopped running from himself and found that God was waiting even there. The last scene I imagine of Thomas is simple. He is sitting by the window in the late afternoon. Mary is in the other room. The house is quiet but not empty in the old way. A child's drawing is still on the refrigerator. The wooden cross still hangs above the doorway. The chair still creaks when he shifts his weight. Outside, the light is fading slowly, the way light does when it wants to teach you that endings can be gentle. Thomas closes his eyes. He remembers many things. Some bring sorrow, some bring gratitude, a few still ache. But they no longer feel like enemies breaking into the house. They feel like old rooms he has finally learned how to walk through with God. He is not proud of everything. He is not ashamed of everything either. He is a man, loved imperfectly, forgiven undeservedly, still learning, still becoming. And in that quiet, he understands at last that the real home was never only the walls around him. It was the condition of the soul within him. After 70, a man may lose strength. He may lose speed. He may lose titles, routines, certain illusions, and parts of the future he once assumed would always be waiting. But he does not have to lose peace. Peace can still be built inside, quietly, honestly, with repentance where it is needed, with forgiveness where it is possible, with gratitude where the heart has grown blind, with grace in every room that once held only fear. And maybe that is the deepest lesson. When the outer world becomes smaller, the inner world must become truer. When applause fades, conscience speaks louder. When work no longer defines you, love must become more honest. When the future shortens, mercy becomes urgent. And when you can no longer live by running outward, you must finally learn how to come home inward. So tend that home. Clean the rooms of resentment. Open the windows of gratitude. Let forgiveness repair what pride kept breaking. Make a place for prayer that does not need to impress anyone. Speak the apology. Receive the mercy. Bless the people you cannot control. Hold the memories with truth, but do not let them become chains. And when evening comes, as it comes for every life, may your inner world not feel like a stranger's house. May it feel like a room where grace has been waiting. May it feel like a place where God can sit with you in truth. May it feel at last like home.